Welcome to Formosa Dream Chasers.
We're your hosts, Mary Ann
and Qing-en.
Please join us as we explore the journeys amazing people take in pursuit of their dreams.
And get insights from their experiences.
Let's hit the road
and get started. Hey guys, welcome back to Formosa Dream Chasers. Today we are honored to have Yi-chun Tricia Lin on the show. Tricia Lin is currently Chair and Professor of Women and Gender Studies Department at Southern Connecticut State University. Professor Lin is a Taiwanese feminist scholar dedicated to Asian and Pacific women's writing, Asian American literature, and women of color feminism for the past 3 decades. And more recently, she's been working on comparative indigenous feminist research across Taiwan, Australia, the United States, and beyond.
We invited Tricia to tell us about her story of a lifelong journey in the pursuit of social justice and her advocacy for gender equality. So without further ado, welcome Professor Yi-chun Tricia Lin. Tricia, please say hi to our audience and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Greetings, everyone. This is Yi-chun Tricia Lin. It's such a pleasure to be here. This is how I would introduce myself. 17th generation daughter of Taiwan, making a meaningful life on Turtle Island, commonly called United States, teaching, decolonizing, and constantly educating myself.
You mentioned a 17th generation daughter of Taiwan, and I was actually struck by that. What is the significance of highlighting that?
I do, and thank you for asking the question. I usually put it immediately out there for many reasons. I introduce myself as a very intersectional being, right? 17th generation daughter of Taiwan. There's my gendered self. There's my very geopolitical self. There's also my historical story. So what does it mean to be a 17th generation daughter of Taiwan? I think it's a story of patriarchy. It's a story of a young Taiwanese woman asserting herself in this long historical line. When people ask me, which they rarely do because they kind of awed by 17th generation, they just stop. They say, oh wow. But I really want people to raise the question, what does it mean to be 17th generation? That counts only my paternal generations. So all the maternal generations are disappeared. So that's a very patriarchal story, and that's a very Han story. And given Taiwan's political position internationally, I am so determined to identify myself first and foremost as a daughter of Taiwan. This is sensitive, but I am not afraid of saying this, that when my bio, when it is listed in this international, transnational, nonprofit organization, it was challenged by China. They did not like that one of the board members is associated with Taiwan.
I love the position that you take and the fact that you feel very strongly about that, and you put it out there that I am a 17th generation daughter of Taiwan, and I really love that.
I would say it is part of who I am, and it's a label that's constantly changing the way it's being looked at. My father first told me that he was 16th generation. That would make me 17th generation. But he said it in such a way, it was with some sort of pride, and he even mentioned where we could locate the family genealogy. But then I kept on thinking, what does it mean to be a 17th generation, right? So that means my mother's, they were never accounted for. And, you know, when the first Lin, where I descended from, where were the women that gave them life, a family on this land? So they're very much silenced. That's why I say when people do ask me, I just raise this very patriarchal counting of generations.
Just to clarify, what you mean specifically is because the surname, if I'm not mistaken, is always taken by the male in the family.
Correct, yeah.
And so what happens is the women, they disappear because they always only follow that of the male descendant.
Yep.
Okay.
And speaking of the patrilineal genealogy of your family, Lin, we are curious about the background that you grow up. What was your education like at that time? What was the general condition of women in Taiwan when you are young?
It's all connected, actually. I was born to a financially, economically struggling middle-class family. My father is the first in his family to have left the farm. He turned white-collared. He rose through the rank in a local bank by working as a busboy, someone who did all the chores, and ultimately his diligence and talents got him promoted to be as the treasurer of the bank. But then my father is also one of the few literate people of his family. None of his sisters got educated. And the town I grew up in was quite poor, Zhunan, back then. And a lot of my classmates came from really, really poor families. Many of them would walk to school barefoot. And I was one of the few that actually had shoes consistently on. So it was not a given that you would go to high school. And back then, Taiwan had just started the compulsory middle school education. So what I want to say is that this patriarchal notion of a woman's place in the society is very prevalent, that educating a girl is a waste. So I was told specifically by a neighbor, when she realized my father would actually let me go to middle school, she said, "You're very lucky. Your father is allowing you to be educated." So education is not a given. Education is actually a privilege. In my case, I somehow was always academically very interested. I loved grades. So that got me places. Years later, after my college education, after a graduate degree, and in the midst of pursuing my doctoral degree, my father actually said, "What a pity, if only you were a boy."
Oh, wow. Ouch. I believe that it's a generational thing. I was mentioning to Ching-en, I was really curious about your background because I remember my mom telling me during her generation that society at the time felt it was a waste to educate women because they're just going to get married and have kids anyways and take care of the house. So why waste money? And I'm amazed at your journey. I believe it's one of the few where a woman of that generation was allowed to flourish.
Not without a fight.
Oh, please tell us about that.
Not without a fight.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
It's a very long story. I don't know if you really want to we want to get into it, but
Okay.
I would just say that everyone was against me after college. That was like, wow, you've done it, okay, enough. But then I wanted to pursue a graduate degree that was just like over the top, and they put up with it. I did my master's at Danjiang, Western Languages and Literatures, and I was on the track. It felt very strong to me. My pursuit of revolutionary thoughts was so compelling that I just knew I couldn't stop. But then I had no financial backup anywhere. No, I was already married. I was married off, by the way, and no husband in his right mind would actually send his wife, to be studied, no matter how financially well off he was. And my parents were never in a position to support me. But the desire was so strong, and I felt I could give it a chance. I applied for doctoral degrees with financial aid, and I got into Stony Brook with a teaching assistantship. But even then, everyone was against it. And I can say this decades later. This is a kind of story that's not aired publicly often, but I'll say my mother, just days before my departure for the States, said to me, "You're lucky. Your husband is letting you go. I was ready to stop you in the airport." But what made my husband agree to it is that it was irrefutable. I have the grant. I have the scholarship.
Oh, thank you for sharing a little bit. And I think it just also highlights that sometimes in pursuing your calling, you have to make hard choices. You have to decide that it is what you really want to do. That does bring me to the next part of the question. What made you decide to focus on women's and gender studies?
It was not a choice per se.
Okay.
I did my undergraduate degree in English and American literature with a certificate in education. Did my master's here in Western languages and literatures, and I did my PhD in comparative literature. And note that in Taiwan, when I was studying, there was no such a thing as gender studies. I don't even believe I have studied much written by women at all. Even in graduate school, even when I was doing my doctorate in the States, works by women were still not very much in the offering. So much is really studying the white man, right? Just looking back, I think it's almost inevitable because that there's always that strong sense of what is right, what is wrong in me growing up. When I was given the opportunity to teach a course of my own, designing my own syllabus, deciding what to read, what not to read. And that was actually composition one when I was teaching in one of the first colleges in New York City, Borough Manhattan Community College, where I eventually became associate professor. That was my first post. So when I was given that liberty to teach what I wanted to teach, I just put in women authors. And I put in Maxine Hong Kingston's 1975 memoir, The Woman Warrior, Memoirs of a Girlhood Among Ghosts. A book that has remained really instrumental in my what I call radicalization as a feminist. I put that book in the syllabus, and I think it was a student who called my attention to it, my feminist agenda, which I wasn't aware. So one student, a smart white kid from New Jersey raised his hand and said, "Why are we only reading about immigrants and women?" My goodness, of course, that question is fraught with biases, right? So I said, "Daniel, let's go through the syllabus together." I said, well, E.E. Cummings, is he an immigrant or a woman? Shakespeare, immigrant or a woman? How about William Carlos Williams? So when we went over the whole syllabus, it felt very silly. But the fact that I had the audacity to put a book by Asian American women in a course, it was just a little bit over the top for him. So I would want to say that it wasn't really how I chose to work on women writers. Although towards the end of my doctoral career, it became very clear that I had a very strong interest in some of the most creative minds in Asian America. And they happened to be women. So my dissertation was about Asian American women writers. But you don't teach what you write about in your dissertation, but I was able to somehow, infuse here and there some writing by these writers. And later I had the chance to teach at Vassar College. It's a very special summer program. Teaching in that program has also opened me up to more of the audacious teaching, if you will, that I was able to bring in even more writing. So I would teach in a way understanding everyone is brilliant. Everyone has all the potential. We should not limit what they can or cannot read. And I would really offer very challenging texts to my remedial English writing class. So I guess just by teaching these courses, experimenting as educator who's constantly learning about her trade, learning about things happening in the classroom. I turned more and more into women writers. And then ultimately I was invited to apply for this director position of women's studies. I was hesitant, but then they say, we think it would be awesome if you could apply. I said, well, I've been teaching English and composition and Asian American studies. I don't know if I've done women's studies, but the invitation was such that I said, well, you know what, let me just give it a try. So I spent a whole weekend revisiting my vita and going through what I had done. By the time I produced my job application, I said to myself, this job is mine, because I realized I have done a lot more work on women's studies material than I realized. And I was also the convener of the CUNY Women's Studies Conference. CUNY is City University of New York, and those that know CUNY would know that CUNY is about 20 plus campuses. And I, with a colleague of mine, we pulled together a CUNY-wide Women's Studies Conference. I got to know sort of the history and the mapping of who's who in CUNY. So just to say, it was all these little pieces that brought me to women's and gender studies.
Hi everyone, that's all for today. Be sure to tune in next week as we continue our chat with Yi-chun Tricia Lin. See you then. Again, this is Qing En
And Mary Ann. See you guys next Sunday. Bye.